Hello everyone, this is going to be 5.3 Greek thinkers, artists, and writers. So, our objectives, we're going to analyze the political and ethical ideas developed by ancient Greek philosophers. We are going to understand how balance and order governed Greek art and architecture, and we're going to identify the themes explored by ancient Greek writers and historians. So, with all the warfare that we were talking about the last couple sections with the Persian War and the Peloponnesian War, probably what best defines ancient Greece, especially Athens, are its ideas. We've talked about democracy, first of all, but now we're going to look at their philosophy, art, and architecture really quick, which is still very prevalent in the modern day. So, first, let's look at philosophies. To be a philosopher means to be a lover of wisdom. That is its literal meaning. They are looking for truth. They are looking for an ethical way to live. They used rational thinking and logic and reason to create ideas about the world around them and to draw conclusions about them. And in doing so, they hoped that they could discover the laws that maintain and control the universe. This is also the basis for a lot of our modern critical and scientific reasoning and thinking. So, some Greek philosophers also were into morality and ethics, how you should live, what does it mean to be a good human being. In ancient Athens, some philosophers actually believed that being a successful human being was more important than being a moral human being, so that money is more important than goodness. And these philosophers would sort of argue using what's called rhetoric. They would study the art of speaking and how to speak well, and they sought success above all others. And these are guys known as sophists. Older Athenians thought that they were being immoral and not focusing on Greek values. They were focusing on success over morality. Now, one of these guys was one of the main critics of the sophists was a man named Socrates. Socrates was an Athenian philosopher, and we don't know a whole lot about him. Mostly we know about his student Plato. Plato wrote books, including Socrates. Socrates is best known right now for what we call the Socratic method, which is using questions that force you to sort of re-examine your own perspective. And if you answered one of his questions, he would sort of ask another question to make you think deeper about it. So, he would ask, oh, what is a dog? Well, it's a creature with 4 legs. Oh, so all creatures with 4 legs are dogs? Until finally you had to work your way down to the best possible answer. So here's Socrates. He's the one with the beard. Eventually, Socrates was put on trial. He was accused of corrupting the values of the children of Athens through his teachings. He was also accused of failing to respect the gods by asking too many questions, basically. And he defended himself very well. However, his enemies were the one putting him on trial, so he was found guilty and he was executed. He accepted this sentence, and he drank a cup of poison that he had to pay for himself. So here is Socrates, declaiming and philosophizing from his own deathbed. Now, the most famous student of Socrates was a guy named Plato. Plato left Athens after Socrates was executed for some reason, I don't know why, and when he returned, he set up a school called the Academy. And he used philosophy and reason and rational thought to attempt to discover the perfect thing, the idea of perfect beauty, perfect truth. In his book, The Republic, he also said there is a perfect government out there, and there is a perfect state that can regulate its citizens perfectly, and he was trying to find that too. And he said it would have 3 kinds of people. It would have workers, it would have soldiers, and it would have philosophers, and philosophers would be the ones in charge. So here's Plato. He's the one with the beard. So we also have ultimate authority. The ultimate authority would be the wisest of the philosophers, so the philosopher king. So again, he believed that the philosophers should be in charge, amazingly enough, considering he was a philosopher. Now, he did think that men were superior to women, but he did say that some women were talented enough to serve within the state, including being part of the elite rulers. Plato's most famous student was Aristotle. Aristotle was famous for looking at government, and he looked at all the forms of government around, all the good and the bad and everything in between, and in the end, he thought that the best kind of government had one virtuous leader. So he thought that there should be one guy up at the top who had virtue at its heart. Aristotle also recommended living a good sort of middle-of-the-road life, a moderate life without extremes, and he called this living by the golden mean. And he set up a college called the Lyceum to teach his beliefs. Later on, a lot of European universities were based on this example. So here's Aristotle. He's the one with the beard. So let's look at conveying ideals of architecture and art as well. Plato said that everything on earth had an ideal form, even if we could never see it because we could not see that sort of perfection. Greek artists and architects did try to capture this sort of perfection, though. So we see it in architecture. They thought that the perfect building would have balance and beauty as a part of it. One of the most famous examples is the temple to Athena, known as the Parthenon in Athens. It had a rectangular base, a triangular roof, strong corners. It was not a rounded building at all, and strong pillars holding it up, too. Greek architecture is still very widely admired, and American architects use it in a lot of our public buildings, also as a way to say, hey, we're kind of following the Greeks when it comes to our democracy. So here is the Parthenon in Athens. You might notice it if you look at the U.S. Capitol, which has a little Parthenon hidden inside of it. And the Supreme Court looks very similar as well. Now, early Greek artists were looking at humans. And early Greek art, we see humans painted as stiff, one-dimensional people, flat, cartoon-like characters, almost like what we see with the hieroglyphs in Egypt. However, by 450 BCE, the art and the sculptures had become much more lifelike, even though they tried to make the people look more perfect and ideal. The only ancient Greek paintings that we have left over are mostly the ones on pottery, and they do show a bit of everyday life as well. So here we see the sort of more flat, cartoony Greek pottery examples. But we do see that the sculptors tried to create perfection. They tried to make the human beings look as ripped and, muscular and godlike as possible. So here's an example of ancient Greek sculpture. Lastly, let's look at literature. Greek literature is mainly found in poems of Homer, other poets like Sappho, and they often were doing things like idealizing beauty and in their works. Later civilizations would make Greek literature the standard for this is what good writing looks like. Probably the most famous Greek writings that we have are their plays. Greek plays started as religious festivals and rituals to honor the gods, and generally they were retellings of famous myths and famous stories. The actors wore costumes and masks that exaggerated their emotions and also made their voices louder. And oftentimes these plays would discuss social issues, moral issues. They would talk about the relationship between the men and the gods. So here is a modern example of ancient Greek theater using their ancient masks. The best known of the Athenian playwrights was Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides. These guys are all tragedians. They wrote tragedies, plays that talked about human suffering, usually ending in lots of death and destruction. And often their tragedies involved very powerful people, showing that even kings are not immune from misfortune, especially if the gods are against you. Some showed the tragedy of humans trying to get one over on the gods. So Oedipus Rex, the king, by Sophocles, shows a king who is destined at his birth to murder his father and marry his mother. And in trying to escape this destiny, he accidentally succeeds in fulfilling it and murders his father and marries his mother. Euripides believed that men caused their own tragedies. It was not the gods who caused our tragedies, but ourselves. In Trojan Women, he used the Trojan War to show war as brutal and unglamorous, and war is bad, basically, was what he said in Trojan Women. And so here's the famous line from Hercules talking about Oedipus. Anyway, Greek comedies were also very popular. Some of them are just straight up slapstick. Other ones, though, are using humor to kind of poke at people and mock them, what is called satire. The best known surviving plays of this are the plays of Aristophanes, who wrote plays like Lysistrata. Lysistrata is the story of the women of Athens banding together to deny love to their husbands until they end the Peloponnesian Wars. And oftentimes they would even ridicule real people. They would mock real people in their things, which is something that we still do today in things like, think of like Saturday Night Live and political cartoons. These are all sort of children of the Greek comedies. And so here is a modern version of Lysistrata where they're basically doing Greek protests. Lastly, history. Herodotus is known as the greatest of the historians. He was a guy who actually traveled to other lands and wrote histories about the other people. He interviewed people for their stories of important events for his books like the Persian Wars. He used the word history or inquiry to describe what he was doing, and that is the origin of what I do for a living. Now, although he tried to be fair and even handed, he was Greek. And he tended to take a Greek perspective of things when he was writing. He tended to be very Greek heavy when talking, like when he did the Persian Wars. The Greeks are the heroes, definitely. We have other historians like Thucydides who were much more critical of the Greeks, especially because he lived through the Peloponnesian War, where the Greeks were fighting each other and the Athenians lost, and so he had a bit of a perspective on the Greeks from that. So here is Herodotus. He's the one with the beard.